Hello, welcome to another episode of Matt's Wild About Nature. My name's Matt. It's been a little while, I know. Haven't done a video. Sorry about that. But I'm out here doing one because spring is just around the corner. We're literally only a couple weeks from spring. And with spring comes something that we got to talk about. Something that affects everybody. And it has to do with the weather. Now I have to warn you, this video is gonna blow. You also could say it'll suck. And it might spin you around. If you know what I'm talking about, stick around and let's find out. Did you figure out what I was talking about? Did you get the hints about what I was alluding to when I said this video will blow and will probably suck and spin you around? If you guessed tornadoes, you're right. So we gotta talk about tornadoes. This is a follow-up to my thunderstorm video. If you watched that, great. If you haven't, go back and watch that one before you watch this one. It'll help put things together. For those who've already seen my thunderstorm video, tornadoes are something that happens a lot out here in the West. Now again, we're in the panhandle of Texas, right up near Oklahoma. And Oklahoma, as everybody knows, is part of what's called Tornado Alley. Now, tornadoes are something that comes around not just in the spring and the summer, but there's another one, Tornado Alley, in the east over Georgia and Alabama during the winter. But we're talking about Tornado Alley here during the summer and the spring. So what is a tornado? Well, a tornado in the easiest form is a cone or a funnel caused by warm and cold air and wind shear. Now we're going to dive into that and unpack that a little bit. So cold and warm air, same thing that creates thunderstorms. They mix and they create instability. Now, wind shear, you may have heard wind shear when they're talking about hurricanes. Now, wind shear is the difference in speed and direction of the wind at different altitudes. So the wind may be blowing to the east, down here where we are, but about 1,000 feet up or so, it could be blowing to the north. And it could be blowing faster or slower than what it is down here. So what this does is this creates like a spiral effect. The air starts spinning, and it starts spinning on its side horizontally. And if the wind shear is correct, it'll begin to spin vertically, and that's where we get tornadoes from. So it's the same thing with dust devils. If you've ever been out here or you've seen dust devils, and dust devils happen just about anywhere. A really good way to see one, even if you're not out here in the West, is wherever there's a 90-degree angle of a building. You're going to see the air or leaves spin. That's the wind shear and the cyclonic action that tornadoes are made of, but that's only because of the placement of that building. As the air comes, it hits that corner and just spins. But what we're talking about is something a whole lot more violent and dangerous, and we'll get into that next. So we're talking about tornadoes. We just talked about how they're created and what they are, but now we're going to talk about the different kinds of tornadoes. And what I say by that is I'm talking about the size and the power of tornadoes. So in 1995, there was a hurricane that hit Florida called Hurricane Andrew. Now, it was the most powerful hurricane that had hit the United States. It was a strong Category 5. Category 5 is the highest category that you can have with a hurricane. Now, after the hurricane went through and investigators went through, they started finding evidence of tornadic events. And a doctor named Tetsuya Theodore Fujita came over from Japan and started looking at the evidence. Now, Dr. Fujita had been studying tornadoes for a very long time. He came up with the idea of how they are formed. He had a lot of lab experiments with how they act, how they're created, and he flew over with some of the investigators and pointed out, saying that the reason why Hurricane Andrew was so dangerous wasn't so much because of the hurricane force winds, but because there were tornadoes inside that hurricane. Now, Fujita came up with what's called a Fujita scale. Now, back in the 90s and the 80s, it was the Fujita scale, and it went 1 to 5. Now, it is known as the enhanced Fujita scale, and it goes from 0 to 5. We're going to break down that amount and what each size tornado there is and how dangerous it is next. So, the Fujita scale, or the enhanced Fujita scale. Now, these scales are, the Fujita scale was determined by how much wind was created by that tornado. The enhanced Fujita scale goes a different direction and determines on how much damage is caused by that tornado. Now, we're going to go over the Fujita scale and the enhanced Fujita scale. Talk about the differences between them, and maybe we'll talk about the sizes of the tornadoes. But I have my phone with me because this is a lot of information to remember, and even for me, it's a little too much for me to remember. So if I'm not looking at the camera, sorry. So, the Fujita scale ranks tornadoes as an F0, 40 to 72 miles an hour, the wind. An F1, 73 to 112. F2, 113 to 157. F4, 207 to 260. And F5, 261 to 318. Now, that makes tornadoes the most devastating natural weather event next to floods. Hurricanes, the winds can get up to about 200 miles an hour or a little bit higher, so tornadoes have more wind than hurricanes. Now, the enhanced Fujita scale goes EF0 is 65 to 85 miles an hour. The EF1 is 86 to 110 miles an hour. EF2, 111 to 135. EF3, 136 to 165. EF4, 166 to 200. And EF5, over 200. Now, what that means is EF0 creates light damage. EF1 creates a little bit more, and you get the point. EF5 creates the most amount of damage. If you've ever watched any tornado video like Twister or Into the Storm, it talks more about those scales, and you can understand them a little bit better. But also, it shows you the sizes of those tornadoes. An EF0 could be the same speed as a dust devil, and it's usually a very thin, small tornado, all the way up to an EF5, which could be, there have been tornadoes that have been a half mile or more across, with winds, as you just heard, exceeding 300 miles an hour. Now, the other thing about a tornado is how long it stays on the ground. And for that, we're going to talk about how long it stays in the ground and what affects that next. Now, tornadoes are extremely powerful, but they're also very fragile. Now, what I mean by that is that almost anything can interrupt a tornado. That doesn't mean a building or anything like that, but it means other weather situations can affect a tornado. An EF0, EF1, or even an EF2 can be dispersed by an adjacent wind. So if it's heading towards you and there's a wind blowing the other direction, it can destabilize that tornado. It's a little bit harder when it comes to the bigger tornadoes, but again, they're fragile and they can be broken up by a change in weather. They can be broken up by a front or another thunderstorm. There's even an idea out there that it could be broken up by man-made things. Like if someone were to create a very large force of wind, they would be able to stop that tornado by just pushing that wind the other direction. Now that, I can't really say that that's actually has any real merit to it, but it'd be interesting to see anyway. So again, tornadoes are fragile, but don't think that they won't do incredible harm. Hundreds of people are killed every year by tornadoes. Now, hundreds may be a little exaggerate, but tornadoes do kill a good number of people every year, and the damage is crazy. The problem we have, though, is that nobody can truly study tornadoes because nobody can really get sensors in there. Now there have been companies and people that are called storm chasers who have gotten instruments in there, and that's just the beginning. What we're trying to do is we're trying to understand why a tornado forms and what the conditions are to form them. Now, as I said at the beginning, we explained what causes tornadoes, but just because that weather, those parts of weather are there, does not guarantee a tornado will happen. So that's what's so weird about it, is we don't really know. And so we have tornado warnings. We have the sirens that you hear go off. If you're anywhere where they could possibly have tornadoes, you'll hear during the spring, every noon, the siren will go off. They're testing the sirens every Friday. And they usually start testing them around March or April, because that's about when it starts, but it can start earlier. So those sirens are there to warn you about a tornado. Now, they're not just there for tornadoes. They're there for public alarms. So if there was a tornado, if there was a chemical spill, if there was some type of other natural disaster, they'll turn those sirens on, and they sound very much like an air raid siren, because that's basically what they are. Is they're basically air raid sirens that were created after the air raid sirens from World War II. So these sirens go off, but they can only go off by the National Weather Service when they've actually detected a tornado. Now they do this in multiple ways. One is by radar, and they can look at the wind direction on radar. Doppler radar doesn't just tell you where rain or snow is. It can also tell you where the wind is going and what's in the wind. It can tell you if there's hail or or rain or whatever like that. But it can tell if there's different directions of wind. That's not always accurate though. So that's also why they use spotters. Now spotters, most of them are also storm chasers. A lot of them are amateur storm chasers, and there are some out there that make money on it and they spend their entire life chasing tornadoes. Norman, Oklahoma is the home of the Severe Storms Lab, and that is where a lot of storm chasers congregate. They head there because that's one of the best places to look for tornadoes, in Tornado Alley. So spotters are out there telling, yeah, I see a funnel, or there's a tornado there or there. And they usually use spotters to determine if a tornado actually touched down. But they do investigations going to look at the damage. Now you can tell the damage from a tornado versus just what's called straight line winds or plane winds. And the point and the reason for that is that straight line winds will just knock stuff over. So will regular winds. But tornado winds will spread debris either much further than what a regular wind could, or it'll leave it in like a circle. They check all of these, and that's what they do. They go out and they spend time watching for these tornadoes. So, what have we learned? We've learned what tornadoes are. We've learned what they do. We learned how they are created. We have learned the scale, the Fujita scale, and the enhanced Fujita scale. And we've learned exactly the science behind it. And a great way for you to help out, if you want, is you can go and become a weather-worn spotter. Now you have to be 18 or older, or you could have your parents do it, and it's very simple. You just go online, go to weather-worn, and you can sign up. And all you do is give the information of where you are during a storm. It's extremely helpful. So until next time, stay wild.